Well, welcome to Chapter 2, Aligning Training with Strategy. It's an important topic, and those of you who've had me in class before probably recall that strategy is a big thing for me. It's important because, properly deployed, strategy leads to a competitive advantage, and a competitive advantage leads to success. Now, it's important also because I believe that HR does a less than stellar job at developing and deploying strategy. So if we don't think and act strategically, how do we think and act? Well, if not strategic, then probably tactical. If we don't think and act strategically, then we think and act tactically. Now, I'm not implying that thinking and acting tactically is bad or evil, quite to the contrary. Most people in organizations spend a large part of their time in tactical endeavors, and they should. But leadership must think and act strategically. What's the difference between tactics and strategy? That's one of the topics for this lecture. When I decide how to finance my retirement, I'm thinking strategically. Actually, investing money in that retirement is a tactic. When I decided to pursue an advanced degree long ago, I was thinking strategically. But when I scheduled my classes from semester to semester, I was thinking tactically. When I decide what new toy to purchase, a fishing pole or a new car or a new computer, etc., I'm thinking, planning, and acting tactically. Convincing my wife that I need those toys and thus gaining her permission can become very strategic, long-range operation. And when my wife tells me that I can't buy my new toy, she may be thinking and acting strategically or tactically. It's kind of up to her. I just don't ask questions. But when I acquiesce pleasantly, I'm definitely thinking of long-term consequences and more strategic in nature. You see, this strategic tactical stuff has a great applicability at home as well. In this lecture, we will discuss training strategy further and from a little different perspective. We will distinguish between tactical training and strategic training and discuss how both are necessary. It's been my experience that mediocre organizations do a poor job of effective tactical training and an even worse job of strategic training. But you are faced with this choice and this dilemma as well in your personal life and career. How much time and money, translated as resources, do you spend on strategic training and how much on tactical training? How many resources do you expend preparing for a career enhancement or a possible career change down the road? And how much do you spend on tactical training to refresh your current skills or gain new skills in your current job? Strategy is planning things, and tactics are doing things. So as you read this material and lecture, think about strategy and tactics in terms of organizations, but also in terms of your family and career. Such decisions have far-reaching implications for your career success and earning power. It creates or destroys your competitive advantage. Once again, welcome to Chapter 2. Notice the title of this chapter is Aligning Training with Strategy. It's not aligning training and strategy. They are different entities, but not separate entities. They are linked. In most cases, effective strategy requires training, and effective training must be guided by good strategy. Strategy defines where we want to go, and training provides the tactical vehicle to help us gain the skills and knowledge to get there. And that relationship is true of organizations and individuals. Long ago, I invested in returning to school to obtain an advanced degree. I knew that the advanced degree would not likely translate into more money at my current job, but in the future, it would solidify my career and even expand my management experience into other endeavors such as teaching. That was clearly strategic. At the same time, I regularly attended classes, seminars, and conferences to refresh and enhance my skills in HR management and in my current position. Those were tactical. Regardless, I spent a lot of time on training and education, and I don't regret a single moment of that investment. So what is the difference between tactical activities and strategic activities? Let's look at a couple of outside sources to distinguish tactics from strategy. Merriam-Webster dictionary defines tactics as, quote, the art or skill of employing available means to accomplish an end. What is the end? The strategic plan of the organization. The Business Dictionary defines tactics as, quote, means by which a strategy is carried out, planned, and ad hoc activities meant to deal with the demands of the moment and to move from one milestone to another in pursuit of the overall goal or goals. In an organization, strategy is decided by the board of directors and tactics by the department heads for implementation by the junior officers and employees, end quote. And here are the two references so that you can look those up yourself. From this, you may surmise that in general, tactics are short-term and strategy is long-term. So the question between tactics and strategy is often a question of short-term versus long-term. The mistake often made by organizations and individuals is the belief that these two options are mutually exclusive. It's an either-or question. Where do I invest my resources? The answer to that question is both. You must invest resources into training, both short-term tactical and long-term strategic. Therefore, both have value and must be balanced. Unfortunately, the long-term strategic normally gets the short end of the stick. That option is minimized or ignored altogether in favor of short-term tactical activities. Why? Well, short-term tactical training is often the result of an event. It's a reaction to something that has already happened or is about to happen. Long-term training or strategic training is conducted in anticipation of a desired outcome. The benefits of short-term training are readily apparent, while the benefits of long-term training are often invisible, non-measurable in the present. As I said in the previous chapter, that's a hard sell. I once conducted sexual harassment training for all employees in an organization that included about 2,000 technical and management employees. The training was not to change the culture and ensure a respectful work environment, but the result of a particularly nasty and costly sexual harassment charge and a very negative ruling by the EEOC. It was tactical training in that it was the result of an event that had already occurred. For that reason, the training was reactive and focused on what individuals could and could not do in the workplace. There was no attempt to conduct training to initiate cultural change in the organization, which would have been a long-term and strategic. And I must say, the culture of the environment in the organization was coarse, disrespectful, particularly to women, and unpleasant. Such was acknowledged by management, but there was little desire to improve the culture. Just stop the bleeding. And they spent a lot of money doing just that. And often, not always, that is what we find in tactical endeavors, including training. Stop the bleeding. When I do a needs assessment, and we'll talk about that in a later chapter, on my health, I may find that I am in need of some intervention to address certain problems. I may need a pacemaker to assist my heart's operation. That's tactical and addresses a heart rhythm problem that has already occurred. They don't insert pacemakers because you may have a problem in the future. It's tactical and very necessary. But the true remedy for my heart condition may be long-term behavior change, better diet, more exercise, weight loss, etc. It may involve taking classes, studying material, gaining knowledge, and changing behavior long-term. That's strategic. Once the bleeding is stopped, we must address the causative issues long-term. And this is where organizations fail in training. Effective strategies create competitive advantages, and as I indicated previously, competitive advantages create success. If our prior strategies have created successful competitive advantages, we are winning. Why do we want to waste valuable resources to invest in different strategies for the future? Why not just keep doing what we're doing? After all, it's working. Simply put, strategic planning and subsequent training is necessary because the future is not the present. What's working now is under attack by our competitors who seek to change the future and destroy our competitive advantage. We can only be successful in the future if we plan today. Another duh moment, huh? Why am I spending so much time on the obvious? Well, often success breeds complacency, and complacency enhances the status quo. If you desire to maintain the status quo, discouraging new knowledge and discouraging training focused on long-term endeavors is desirable. Training and education is the enemy of complacency and the status quo. I guess what I'm really saying is that training is directly connected to the organizational strategy, good or bad. If an organization has a good strategy, a progressive strategy, training plays an integral role in realizing that strategy. If an organization has a strategy that values the status quo, training is a secondary consideration to be undertaken only when necessary. Such as it is with our life as well. If personal growth is important to us and our families, training and learning is essential. If we value the status quo, we expend resources to learn only to enhance that status quo or when absolutely necessary. So, what does this have to do with aligning training with organizational strategy? The authors of the text state, quote, "Thus, from the HR unit's perspective, the organizational strategy provides the direction for HR's strategic objectives," end quote. If the organization has a progressive strategy that calls for growth in the competitive market, HR's training strategy will likely reflect that progressive concept. But if the organizational strategy includes maintaining the status quo, as in my previous example of the sexual harassment company, HR's training programs will likely stop the bleeding but do little to address real systemic issues. So in organizations that are future-oriented and intent in not letting the status quo interfere with development of competitive advantages, much training, both tactical and strategic, is invested in change management. What is the relationship between change management and training? Change management is much broader and bigger topic than training. Training is a tool in change management, but change does not always occur due to training. Training is one factor to drive change, but not the only factor. And certainly training does not necessarily ensure change. I used an example in Chapter 1 related to the organization steeped in traditional management styles and practices. Top management developed a strategy to upgrade management to include more delegation of authority throughout the organization. They wanted to manage differently, think differently, and act differently. Thus, we developed an HR and training strategy to support that new organizational strategy. As I explained in the previous lecture, HR changed how they hired, evaluated, rewarded, and developed employees throughout the organization. Our strategy was very progressive, and our tactics were extensive and touched every employee in the organization. Was the effort successful? Not particularly. Although the training was aligned with the stated organizational strategy and training activities were well designed and extensive, there were other factors working against implementing the new strategy. In that organization, both internal and external factors combined to drive or impede the change dictated by the stated strategy. Externally, the competitive marketplace was very difficult. The organization was competing in a worldwide market that presented many challenges. The organization was not extremely profitable and at times lost money. And the competitive marketplace was changing rapidly and required many course corrections to maintain a competitive position. It is difficult to change to something new and untested when the status quo is under constant attack. In other words, it is difficult to envision future change when one is fighting for survival. Internally, there were a number of managers at all levels of the organization who were dedicated to the status quo. They were actually afraid of change and were threatened by granting more authority to employees at lower levels. They viewed employees as tools to be managed, not as contributors to success. Many actually viewed employees as problems to be managed as entities that constantly worked against success. Their goal was to derail any change initiative. They weren't necessarily against training, but were definitely against the goal of the training. In short, the organizational strategy was held by top management, but not by all of top management. The organizational strategy was not sold to the populace and was not fully accepted. Training was well designed and effective, but the strategy was not well designed and defined and accepted. Now, that certainly was not the belief of most managers and employees. Most readily understood that organizational change was imperative and necessary. Most liked the direction and desired end result of the change. Most were not threatened by change, although a little apprehensive about the magnitude of the change and the restricted time frame to accomplish that change. But the number opposed was substantial enough to hinder the effectiveness of the training and marginalize the change process. Coupled with the external market threats, the internal obstacles inhibited the effectiveness of the training and the extent of change of the change process. Was training entirely ineffective in the organization? Definitely not. Many individuals were positively touched by the training and became better employees. Many individuals were touched personally and indicated that the training changed how they conducted their lives at home and at work. Many functional parts of the organization changed for the better. They became more innovative, productive, efficient, and effective. Was the change process a failure? Definitely not. The organization did change in many positive ways. It abandoned the traditional management concepts in part and became more progressive. Management changed how they viewed employees and the potential contributions employees were capable of making. The status quo was shaken, but not abandoned. The organization was very different after the training and change initiatives than before. However, the change process did not reach the heights expected or hoped for. The organization changed, but not as much as was desired, or in my opinion, as needed. The lesson here is simple. Training is a tool, an important and effective tool. Training enhances and improves current skills when directed to filling short-term gaps. Training can also create new opportunities, competitive advantages, and change when directed to longer-term organizational strategies. But training is only as good as the organizational strategy. Training cannot create change unless it is aligned with the real, not merely stated, organizational strategy. But when employed properly, training is a powerful tool for short-term improvement and a driver of long-term change. And need I say it again? The same is true in our private lives as well. When you developed your educational strategy, success depended on your commitment to that strategy. But it also depended on the commitment of your support group, parents, spouse, kids, friends, etc. If all were on board, your chances of successfully completing a degree program and gaining meaningful and useful knowledge was enhanced. But if you were not fully committed, or if key members of your support group were not fully engaged and supportive, your chances of completing a degree program were hindered greatly. Shall we say it starts with a shared strategy marked by high commitment? Without a shared strategy with commitment, all the training and educational programs won't gender success to the desired level. You may drop out of the program after 1 or 2 years. You will be smarter and you will have certainly changed, but not to the level originally stated or desired. Do you get the picture that strategy alignment is important? Do you think strategy and strategy alignment is important to driving successful change? Remember, training is a tool in change management, a tool that must be relevant, well-designed, and effective. Just as poor strategy can negate good training, bad training can destroy good strategy. I started this lecture by indicating that training and strategy are different entities, but they are linked. And perhaps a primary link is in continuous change and change management. I hope some of my examples have illustrated that linkage. However, there's another linkage that is important: the individual. To this point, I have, for the most part, discussed organizations as a whole. But organizations are made up of people, and people are really the focus of training. We talked a bit about how to drive change in organizations, but how do we drive change in individuals? How are people motivated? How do people learn? How do people apply knowledge? Those will be the topics covered in the next chapter and lecture. But before we go, what's your strategy? Do you have commitment from your support group? Not a bad time to ask the questions and reinforce your drive to change.